All right, peeps, on today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be discussing who of all of Bruce Lee's characters was the best fighter. Lots of gems, lots of drinking and whoring, and lots of Cheng Chao An gets his ass kicked a whole lot of the time. Let's get to it!
And every day, I practice martial arts. Watch out!
Yo, Mikey, how you doing, man?
Doing great, Seagong. How you doing?
Good. So today, we're going to do something a little bit different. We occasionally have these, I suppose you could call them themed episodes, where instead of just taking the hodgepodge of hot nonsense that are our listener questions.
Hodgepodge of hot nonsense.
Yes.
Sounds like, what's it called? What do they call those things? Not limericks, tongue twisters.
Yes. I feel most of the questions I have to answer are like a tongue twister.
Brain teasers.
Yeah, which is great because, we get like within one episode, maybe we'll do 5 questions and that can cover the gamut from Bruce Lee to Wing Chun to Kung Fu movies or whatever. But every once in a while, I like to just say, hey, let's just basically talk about one thing for the whole episode. And occasionally we get some really, really good questions that are worthy of an entire episode. And I think that we have one of those this time. But before we get started, just want to remind everyone that the best way to support the Kung Fu Genius is on Patreon. And the link for that is in the description, whether you're listening to us on audio or here on YouTube. That link is below. And for as little as $5 a month, you get access to episodes early. You get my Instagram subscriber reels and occasional little goodies. And you basically get a fast track for any questions you might have that you want us to answer. We always give Patreon questions priority. So patreon.com/the Kung Fu Genius to support us there. By the way, still getting questions about the Hong Kong trip. It's booked, guys. Sorry.
One, dare I say, is overbooked?
Yeah, I would say. I have more people coming than I originally planned, but I have some more help now on the Hong Kong side to accommodate the larger group. So it should be good. But anyway, I'll most likely do it next year. But this year's trip is going to be amazing. So anyway, so I know you guys keep asking. Sorry about that. I had given you as much warning as I could all the way back in January. And yes, we're going next month. Maybe by the time this episode comes out, we may already be in Hong Kong because we are recording a little bit in advance to make sure we have enough episodes for the time that we're gone. So anyway, next year. Okay, so now I'm going to have you read the question, which is from Chris Bach, who's a regular commenter and watcher of our podcast. He's kind of a bit of a lengthy question, but let's go to it.
Hey, look, it's all the devil's in the detail, right? So here we go. Very good list about the villains. If you have time, here's my question. Who of Bruce's movie characters was the strongest / best / most effective street fighter? The candidates are Cheng Chao An from The Big Boss, Fists of Fury, Chen Zhen from Fist of Fury, Chinese Connection, Tang Lung from Wei, Return of the Dragon, and he is going into the details here, fair play, Li from Enter the Dragon, and Hai Tian from Game of Death. Honestly, I say by far Cheng is the weakest. He was an ordinary guy from China and defeated in Mr. Me, Han Ying Chie, in my opinion, the weakest of the villains, but still he was hurt and hit by him many times. Chen is to me very aggressive, but I think he would lose to his own emotions at some point. Li is a Shaolin monk, so he only knows Shaolin style of fighting, but of course he survived a very deadly situation against a guy with a big claw. To me, it's a match between Tang and Hai. I make a bet with you. The original JKD, in parentheses, like Tommy Carruthers, etc., will say Tang because he basically does original JKD, kicking of the groin and knee and stuff like that.
Right.
And the JKD concepts people will say Hai because he is basically a dude who mixes styles. Even his yellow jumpsuit is a symbol for not being bounded to traditional styles. What's your list, Alex? Who of them would win if they would fight each other? I mean, in one-on-one matches. Not easy.
It is not easy. And it's also interesting because when I got that question, thank you very much, Chris, for that question. It's a really great question because I like, I'm always tired of like the hypotheticals about how Bruce would do in MMA or stuff like that. I prefer hypotheticals to be purely hypothetical and fictive.
And yet you hate Dyson questions.
Well, yeah, but they're hypotheticals, and then there's the drivel that comes out of Dre Ison's mouth, right?
It's a very polite way of putting it.
So, well, I mean, the question first said, which is the best street fighter? But then it also said which one would win on a one-on-one fight, which for me, it's kind of, there's a little distinction in there. But I'm not going to get into the weeds about street fighting versus match fighting or something like that, right? Let's just say you just put the two of them in a room and they go at it, all right? Just so that we don't have to defend the difference between like a duel or a street fight or whatever, right? So the question is interesting, and I decided to not just answer or let's say discuss the question as Chris posed it, but also to maybe flesh it out a little bit and to go a little deeper. So I think for the first part, we can kind of discuss the strengths and merits of those 5 iconic Bruce Lee characters, right? And kind of decide, okay, which one among them is maybe the best, all right? And then, like in general, like what their strengths and weaknesses are. And then maybe have a hypothetical fight between all of them and who would stand on top. And
It'd be
then
a very confusing fight, though, wouldn't it? They all look the same.
They'll look the same.
What if they all come there?
They'll have they'll have slightly different outfits. And Bruce got gradually skinnier as the films went on, for reasons unknown. So we'll have that. And then I also thought, well, what about if we took each of those characters and decided how would they fare individually against the villains of the other films. So, for example, Cheng Chao An from Big Boss, like how would he do against, let's say, Bob Wall from Enter the Dragon? You know,
Right.
like so kind of do like kind of this kind of cross thing, right? Now, of course, look, this is hypothetical about fictional characters or whatever. If anyone has any emotional attachment to anything I say or anything I say gets anyone upset, you need to look in the mirror and just think really hard about your life. And if you still are upset, you need to repeat step 1 a little bit longer.
So
okay?
this is the butthurt caveat, right?
Yeah, the butthurt caveat. Okay, we're discussing fictional movie characters. Okay, so calm down, people. All right. Although do feel free to comment if you think I'm totally wrong, because commenting helps the algorithm. And the snarkier and more upset, the less I care. But the more YouTube cares. So feel free, I suppose, to be as snarky as you want. So anyway, hey everyone, just want to let you know Wing Chun Illustrated is now offering a paperback edition through Amazon, reaching a larger global market. And no, they're not ditching the glossy magazine edition through MagCloud. You can now simply choose the version of this magazine you prefer and the one with the cheapest shipping wherever you live. Order your copy of Wing Chun Illustrated today across 12 Amazon marketplaces with free shipping for Prime members. Go and check that out. So let's discuss our 5 characters. So Chris gave his kind of rundown of those characters, but let's kind of talk about them a little bit. Now, by the way, usually I refer to all of them by their Cantonese names, even the character's Cantonese name. The only problem is that I don't remember exactly what Bruce Lee's Cantonese, the name of his character in Big Boss, what the Cantonese version was. I only watched the Cantonese version, but it's been a while, and I would need to look at the subtitles in Chinese to actually know exactly what his name is.
Yeah.
But I think given that the Mandarinization was something like Cheng Chao An, I would assume it's like Cheng Chao An or something to that effect. But anyway, we'll just call him Cheng Chao An for the Big Boss guy, right? And Fist of Fury is Chun Chun. And we have Tang Long from Way of the Dragon, and we have the very creative Lee from Enter the Dragon. Do you remember that old episode when it was like, wait, what was his name in Enter the Dragon? I'm like, Lee.
Yes, indeed.
And then, of course, Hai Tian from Game of Death. So, obviously, most people who are listening to this podcast should be familiar with those films. And yes, I know Game of Death was never completed, so we have a somewhat limited understanding of Bruce's character in Game of Death because we only know those 3 fight scenes. And if you've seen the extended materials that was released by John Little in the Warrior's Journey, then we know a little bit more than we did when the original 79, 78 version came out. So, Cheng Chao An, Big Boss. All right. So, what do we know about him? Well, he's easily seduced. in like whorehouses and drinking. He is also quick to anger. But he's very scrappy. But I do agree with Chris that he's probably the weakest of the bunch because I suppose the best way to describe that character's fighting skill, he's kind of scrappy.
Yeah.
Of course, he's still Bruce Lee. He's still powerful. He still does all the cool kicks and punches and spin kicks and all that kind of stuff. But he was relatively injured. Well, I mean, he did take a lot from that old man in Big Boss. And of course, if you know the backstory of Big Boss and the change of directors, and the Big Boss is played by Han Ying-git. He wrote his Mandarin name in there, like Han Yin-chia, but he's a guy from Hong Kong. No one knows him as that. So he's the fight choreographer was the fight choreographer for Golden Harvest. So he kind of had to have a part in the movie, and they made him the villain. And if you look at that old man and you look at Bruce Lee, it's like, well, it's really not much of a fight. If that was a real fight, it would be like one kick from Cheng Chao An to his a geriatric head, and Han Ying-git would have been dead. So he had to create some kind of adversity. Like the guy was just such a badass and was able to cut Bruce Lee and diminish him a little bit and so on and so forth. So, but it's not entirely convincing that even that character would have had that hard of a time with the Big Boss. But by the way, the Big Boss, the title is interesting because the English title, the Big Boss, by the way, if anyone calls it Fists of Fury, still in 2023, you need to get a bit of an update. No one has called it that since the 80s. It is the Big Boss. However, the Chinese title is Tongshan Daiheng, which is the big brother from China. So it's interesting. The Chinese title references the hero. The English title references the villain, who's oddly enough not that prominent in the movie until the very end. So, but anyway, you've seen Big Boss, obviously,
absolutely,
right?
yeah.
And there is, when he kind of beat up all those guys, when he had made a promise not to fight, and then his necklace gets ripped off about halfway through the movie, which I think is another reason why people get a little salty about that movie. Is like he doesn't even really fight until halfway through it, because he cannot fight because he has this necklace. He had made a promise to his mother or whatever that he wouldn't fight. And perhaps his fighting had something to do with the fact that why he even went to Thailand to work to begin with. Like, get out of China, you're a big troublemaker. Perhaps there's some parallels to Bruce Lee's own life when he left Hong Kong as a teenager to that. But the story was written originally for James Tien, not for Bruce Lee. And Bruce Lee got hired on by Golden Harvest and kind of kicked James Tien out to the side. And James Tien's career never... that was going to be the vehicle to launch James Tien, which is funny because if you imagine... And James Tien ends up being in Big Boss, but he's like a second fiddle dude. If you imagine Big Boss with James Tien in the lead role, it would have been a very forgettable film. But anyway... Bruce comes in and he has that fight scene, against all of those, the bad Thai guys at the ice factory. And then later he has that big mass brawl where he kicks the guy through the wall and leaves that man-size hole in the wall after he finds that there's drugs being smuggled in the ice. And then finally, he has the big fight with Han Yin-git at the end. But if you remember, the Big Boss, they tried to seduce Cheng Chao An when they found out he was a good fighter, and they got him drunk, and then they had him sleep with that Thai prostitute, right? And in the original film, there's actually a nude scene with Bruce Lee, kind of like he's just covered just enough, where he goes back to the whorehouse before he has his final fight. And If you remember, I think it was in the Ted Thomas interview that we did back in season 1 or season 2. They said, Ted Thomas was like, well, Bruce, why did your character go to the brothel before that final fight? And the idea was that he felt that he might die anyway because the Big Boss had slaughtered all of his co-workers and their families and stuff. So he kind of went in there thinking he was going to die. So going to the whorehouse was like one last hurrah before he would go in and potentially die. And at the end of the movie, it's kind of alluded that he gets arrested and goes to jail. But there's kind of the one thing we do know about Cheng Chao An's character. He's easily seduced. And when he's about to go for his final fight, the most pressing thing is to get his
laid.
rocks off at the whorehouse before going in there, right?
I see literally nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, but see, the thing is, maybe if the average person has had his fighting skills, which is already a weird thing to say because the average person is not that extraordinary in fighting. Mm-hmm. But let's just say his mentality was very average for a dude. He's like this great fighter, but he did a very dude-like thing. But that's also what makes him kind of pedestrian. And what makes him not as spectacular as maybe some of his other characters, perhaps, right? So I think that's the one major flaw in him is that there's something about him that's just kind of too ordinary, that if push really came to shove, he might not have that extra, call it moral fortitude to defeat a really, really high-level villain, right? So I do agree that he might kind of be the weakest. It's also Bruce Lee's first role, and it's a role that originally wasn't written for him. It was adapted to him as it went on. So from a filmmaking and film writing perspective, you can kind of understand it. But again, our hypothetical here is we're assuming these were like real people, all right? So Cheng Chao An, scrappy fighter, but, maybe easily seduced by, a hot Thai girl. Okay. Yes. Did you have something to say?
Well, I was going to say I wanted to like go into that kind of scrappy fighter thing more than anything really, because it's like that's the thing. It's like I'd say, look, in real life, big Arnold Schwarzenegger liked to kind of indulge in the ladies the night before
Right.
A big event because
Right.
he said it helped him relax. You know
Yes.
what I mean? You wouldn't argue that he wasn't a champion.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
So that I can kind of get down with, but like he was just super scrappy, and I kind of feel that if you're absolutely right, if it was like a kind of, more of a slightly younger and more kind of like technical fighter,
Yeah.
like even if like Bruce is that character is like kind of like stronger and he's like kind of emotional,
Right.
Like he's a bit too angry. Like another character with a better kind of fight mentality will just draw him in until he eventually makes a mistake, which he will make a mistake very quickly.
Right. He'll just flash a photo of a girl's boobs and he'll go, and then, and knock him out, right? And then I think there you have it. There's the end of Cheng Chao An, right? Maybe you just wear this shirt, the one that I'm wearing right now, right?
Oh,
And he'll
that is a great shirt.
and he'll keep looking at it and go, and that'll be the distraction, right? So, okay, so that's Cheng Chao An, all right? Scrappy, but perhaps not the most mentally strong of all of them, right? Now we go to the second film, where he played Chun, a semi-fictive character, right? Because Fist of Fury is about the Jingwu Academy, or the Jingmo Academy, which was a real place in Shanghai. It was a real martial arts school in the early 20th, that was founded in the early 20th century. And the name Chun, Chun means like real, and Chun is Chan, right, in Chinese, right? So it's a very kind of cool name. It's like his name is like real. Like it's a very cool and short name. And the reason that they use that name is when they wrote the film, because it is it is based on a school that did exist, but the story is highly fictionalized. Of course, the so-called founder of the Jingwu Academy was Fok Yun Gap, or Huo Yuan Jia in Mandarin, and he died under mysterious circumstances by being tricked by the Japanese and killed or whatever. But there's a lot of evidence to suggest that story is actually fake, because the real founders of the Jingwu Academy were two businessmen, and it seems like their school was founded by Fok Yun Gap, and they have his photo, and he's like a northerner, but he was mysteriously killed. Because what people don't realize, they don't know the history of the Jingwu Academy. When the Jingwu Academy was open, Fok Yun Gap was already dead.
Yeah.
So the founder of the academy was already dead when it opened, okay? Which is sus,
So,
okay?
very suspect.
And then, of course, they created some kind of weird... It's very weird why you would create this story about, like, here's our founder. By the way, he was killed by Japanese. Like, it's a little weird, right? So anyway, they looked at the student roles of Kung Fu students at the Jingwu Academy, and they saw the name Chun on the list. And so the scriptwriters thought that was a cool name, and they just used that name and made the story, Bruce Lee's character, based on a name of a real student from Jingwu, but of course the story is entirely fictitious. And the gag is always like Chen Chao An in real life could have been the worst student at the Jingwu Academy, right? Mm-hmm. And there actually is a funny line in Fist of Fury when he goes to the Japanese school. And he says in Cantonese, he's like, I'm the lousiest student from Jingwu, so I suppose you should start with me. And it's like, and it's kind of, he's like being self-deprecating, but you also know he's not the lousiest student from the Jingwu Academy. But he's kind of saying like, I'm the worst example of the excellence of that school, and if you can beat me, then that's a start. So Cheng Chao An is very skillful, and he's perhaps the best student from the Jingwu Academy. But he also, like Cheng Chao An, has a bit of a character issue, and then he's very quick to anger, and he's very emotional. Because just think of the opening scene where he comes and they're burying his sifu, and it's in the Cantonese version, sifu, right? And he's like so upset, and he's just like, he's, trying to take the dirt off they're putting the dirt on the casket, and he's like jumping on, taking it off. And then he gets knocked, the leader of like one of the seniors has to hit him with a shovel, making that the only time Bruce Lee's ever knocked out in any of his films. So the joke is that old man with the shovel is the only guy to defeat Bruce Lee in any Bruce Lee movie, right? He just basically, cold cocks like Bruce Lee in the back of the head with a shovel, right? The only person who was able to do such a thing to Bruce on film. Mm-hmm. And the rest of the movie, like Bruce is very angry and he's very emotional and everything, like you listen to what I say, the Chinese are not sick men, and everything he says is so, and he's like, now you're eating paper and next time you'll eat glass, and there's something very raw and emotional about him, which can be good if it's channeled well. But as you know, if someone knows how to get someone overly agitated in a fight or angry, you can make that person make a mistake. I mean, just even think of the final frame of Fist of Fury. What does he do? He knows he's going to be killed. What does he just screams and he runs and he jumps into essentially what it would be a bunch of gunfire from these guys pointing guns at him, right? So he's like this, not an entirely rational actor, okay, in terms of his mental state, right? So but he's very, very good. I mean, look at the guys that he defeats. He defeats Japanese fighters in their own school, multiple attackers. He defeats a dude with a sword using nunchucks. He defeats Petrov, played by his dealer, Bob Baker. And he's very impressive, but he can get emotional, which means that he also has there's a dent in his armor, just like Cheng Chao An, right? Show Cheng Chao An boobs and he'll go, and you can defeat him and, say something about his sifu not being that great or whatever, and you probably could do the same to Cheng Chao An, all right? So then we come to Tang Long from Way of the Dragon, who is a bit of a country bumpkin, not unlike Cheng Chao An, but he's a lot less of a hothead. In fact, he's I think he's one of the most relaxed of all of them, right? He's just kind of like a country bumpkin, very somewhat innocent, somewhat naive. But he is very serious about his martial arts training. Now, in Chris Bach's question, he said the original JKD guys kind of champion Tang Long as like the guy who's doing Bruce Lee style Jeet Kune Do. Because as you know, and we've talked about it multiple times on the podcast, there's this schism in JKD between original JKD, which is people who practice or profess to practice that which Bruce Lee himself did up until the time of his untimely demise. And then there's the JKD concepts, which is more or less the Dan Inosanto group, which is that JKD is this ever-evolving thing, and without getting into that, because even just explaining the debate is going to be, well, actually, that's not really what Dan Inosanto means. Like, this is the broad stroke argument that, you can incorporate different styles as long as they fit in the general scheme of what is Jeet Kune Do or whatever. And then there are people that are saying, well, doing jiu-jitsu and all these things in there and mixing it in and still calling it Jeet Kune Do is not really what Bruce Lee had in mind, and then you just let those guys fight about it online, and I just sit back and eat popcorn, right? But if you look at Bruce Lee's movements especially in the end fight scene with Chuck Norris, of course there are a few more spin kicks and things like that than Bruce probably would have done in real life. But there's a lot of like straight lead side kick and like kind of moving, and when he gets going, after he has a little bit of adversity against Chuck, he's got head movement and he's bouncing around, and he is very kind of Bruce Lee JKD-ish. So I like Tang Long so far because he's not emotional. When he faced adversity with Chuck Norris, he kind of dusted himself off and decided to move and adapt. So that means when he faces adversity, he can keep a cool head, unlike maybe some of the other the two previous characters. So, and he's just really good, and he's also kind of cunning, yes.
Now, without getting into it before we finish off with the other two movies, would you say that, like, Chen Zhen is more or less skillful than Tang Long?
That's very difficult to say because, especially like in all the years after all the Marvel films, when I watch movies now, I almost imagine them in a certain universe, right? Because when you watch a movie and you understand how the rules apply, and most of Bruce Lee's films could have all happened in the same universe. So in other words, it's not like one of his films there was magic or demons or ghosts or something, and the other movie is more urban and grounded in reality. You can almost imagine all of his films more or less could have happened in the same universe, could have happened on Earth 1, right? So that is what makes it difficult, because you have only the selection of fights that they had in those films, and I don't know if that gives us enough information to really know. I think Chen Zhen was more willing to kill than Tang Long, because Tang Long was a kind of a modern guy and not nearly as emotional. But I have a feeling Tang Long would have beaten Chen Zhen if it was just a fist fight, maybe no weapons, or death is not on the line, okay? Because I think whatever technical problems Chen Zhen would have given Tang Long would have dusted himself off and would have decided to adapt and figure out a way to do it. Plus, both Chen Zhen and Tang Long can both use nunchucks. Okay? So, in fact, Tang Long knows how to use two nunchucks at the same time, because in Fist of Fury, Bruce Lee, I believe, uses only one. That was the first introduction to it. And then how is he going to up himself in the next movie? Well, you use two. All right. So we don't know if Chen Zhen could use two if he had to, right? But again, the idea is that this is unarmed fighting. So, but anyway, but it does mean that Tang Long does have some additional skills that may help him be a better athlete, let's say, even if he's not using two. He also could use darts to throw them at the guys with the guns and stuff, right? So he's also quite crafty and adaptable.
Yeah.
And I do agree with that assertion that he is kind of like an original JKD guy. Like, that is Bruce Lee. Take away a few of the more spectacular spinning kicks and stuff like that. That is him more or less kind of doing his straight lead, side kick, kind of JKD's, a little bit of Wing Chun thrown in there. So far I'm thinking Tang Long is definitely the strongest of the first three, all right, in my opinion. And now we go to Lee from Enter the Dragon. And this is difficult because although, Chris said, well, he only knows Shaolin Kung Fu, so he's not that adaptable. But I found that he actually was really quite adaptable, because look at the opening fight scene. He's like beating Sammo Hung on his feet and then uses like a neck crank to finish him at the end. And when he's, faced with adversity and there are like two sticks on the ground, he was able to pick them up and use them. He was able to use the single nunchuck, the double, I don't know if he uses double nunchuck in Into the Dragon, maybe just single. And he's able to use a staff. He's able to fight against Han with the claw, the bear claw, and then later like the four-bladed one. And he's able to do multiple attackers. And I would say the fact that he learned one style, I would say Lee's character is actually quite adaptable. Plus, because he has that James Bond-esque kind of spy thing, even though he's just a Shaolin monk who is Can you imagine the British Secret Service or MI6 or whatever just recruiting some random Shaolin monk to do a job that clearly a spy has to do? Because like if you think there's a part like Bruce has to like go and do the Morse code, and he's doing all this spy shit, but his only qualification is that he's an ass kicker. Where did he learn all this other stuff? So they must have had like a dossier on him where he knew all this shit.
Well, is it ever explicitly said in the film that he just knows Shaolin Kung Fu? I thought it's
Well, he's a graduate of the Shaolin Temple, and part of I think one of the weaker subplots of the film is that he's because when he's about to face Han, he's like, "You have offended my family, and you have offended the Shaolin Temple," and it's like, well, technically, it was Han's men who are responsible for your sister deciding to commit suicide before presumably they would have assaulted her. So I don't know if that's directly Han saying, and it's never quite understood. What did Han do that was so bad at the Shaolin Temple? He left. He became a criminal. He started a tournament on his own island. Yeah, I suppose he could be considered some kind of rebel or turncoat of the Shaolin Temple. But like, I mean, did he take a steaming dump in one of like the Shaolin rooms? Or like, what did Han do? Like specifically at the Shaolin Temple or to the Shaolin Temple, besides, breaking the honor code, but like it just like that part seemed a little like,
I don't know. I always took it that it was the fact that he did do all of that, but like there's the prostitution, you know what I mean? There's the drug trade. Like it's kind of like he's
making them look really bad.
Yeah, he's like he's it's not just he's just a rebel. He's gone completely the other way.
But maybe their biggest beef is that he's teaching Shaolin Kung Fu and making them wear karate uniforms.
Yes, and probably that's what it is.
By the way, that's one of the reasons why the film did not do that well in Hong Kong, even though Bruce Lee had just died and his name was all over the place. They felt the film was kind of American chop suey. Like,
right.
Oh, it's a Kung Fu movie. Why is everyone wearing karate gis and stuff like that? So they felt it was a little like Asian for Western audiences, right?
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I could say that, but the thing is, it's still like that has to do with like the honor of the temple, and the honor of the temple isn't like a huge theme in the film. It's just kind of implied.
Right.
It's way more clear that Bruce is going along with this because he wants to get back at the dudes who are responsible for his sister killing himself, right? Or killing herself, I should say. And so he also has a little bit of emotional reasoning, like why he's doing this, like why is he going to go to an island and do all this stuff for Mr. Braithwaite? So it's a little weird, but I wouldn't say that he's not adaptable because he only learned Shaolin Kung Fu. I think the character of Lee in Enter the Dragon showed he's a freaking Shaolin monk who can do Morse code and climb down on ropes and, do, spy and espionage work and meet with secret contacts. I would say this is a pretty flexible and adaptable guy.
I mean, he's barely a Shaolin monk, I think. I mean, look at the suit he wears at the beginning. He looks so freaking fly.
Yes.
Right?
Well, that part is not completely fleshed out. I mean, obviously, there was really no Shaolin temple to train at in the 70s. But the idea was that, and this kind of harkens back to some of the lore of Shaolin, which is all bullshit. but the idea was that, think of the story of the 36th chamber, right? What did as Gordon Liu's character want to do? He wanted to make Shaolin Kung Fu available to the masses so that they could also fight against the evil Cheng. So the 36th chamber was a chamber of Shaolin that was like a school open to the public. So maybe within this universal lore of Shaolin, you have the monks who live at the temple and they have the shaved heads and they take their vows. And then you have the laymen who train at the Shaolin Temple and get the Shaolin Kung Fu without necessarily being a full-fledged ordained monk. And so I think it was kind of implied that Bruce is one of those guys, right? Yeah. Because at the opening scene when he fights Samo, those guys have hair. But then you have actual monks and abbots in the background, right? So I think maybe there is a bit of he's a student of the 36th chamber, so to speak, right? As opposed to being like a full ordained monk. Yeah, because I mean, he's a relatively hip guy. He doesn't freak out when prostitutes are around him. unlike Cheng Chao An. He can handle it. He's not like, he's like a man of the people. He's got that nice suit.
Yeah, oh yeah.
He's someone who can use modern technology. He's someone who's like kind of hip and smart and stuff like that. And, and even when he's like trading barbs with Roper, he's like, you seem very much at home here, Mr. Roper. Like, he speaks like a man of the people. He doesn't speak like someone who's been sequestered in a monastery his whole life. He's like someone who's obviously hip and adaptable. So I would disagree a little bit that he was not adaptable. I would say he's probably the slickest.
Yeah.
In terms of like kind of like a dude who just happens to be a superior fighter. So that then makes the introduction of Lee in this, because I think we can pretty much say that like Chun is too emotional, Cheng Chao An is too mentally weak, and he's just scrappy but not as technical. I think so far it's Tang Long, and now we look at Lee, and if we look at it in universe, all right, then Lee is a way more put together guy than Tang Long, because Tang Long is a bumpkin, and I think Lee is not a worse fighter than Tang Long, but he's also smarter.
Yeah.
So that, I think, makes it like, now like Tang Long is maybe now Tang Long has some competition, and that's Lee from Enter the Dragon. Mm-hmm. But it's difficult to say exactly, but that's an interesting fight right there. Yeah. Tang Long versus Lee. All right.
Because the thing is, now we're getting into a question of motivation, because the one outlier out of the 4 films is Way of the Dragon, because there was no revenge motivation. You know what I mean? Like, so there's no kind of...
Yes, you're right.
And so, like, of course, if...
It was a protective, like, he's protective of his people, right?
Yeah. But, like, he's essentially a hired gun in that film, right?
Yes.
So, like, as their family and all this kind of stuff. But it's
paid for in Chinese food.
Yes, absolutely. 7 bowls of soup. But like, so then all of a sudden it's like, well, if maybe like the boss man in Way of the Dragon, if the story had been different and he'd killed maybe like the girl or like one of his family members, would his temperament have changed? Uh-huh. You know what I mean? And then all of a sudden... In Way of the Dragon.
Oh, in Way of the Dragon.
So then all of a sudden there's like a...
If they killed like Nora Mao's character or whatever. Like,
right.
Yeah.
So then all of a sudden then... Does that mean his temperament changes as a fighter because now he has different motivation?
Right.
I mean? Would he be less cool?
Right.
So.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Because I guess that's also what makes these hypotheticals different or difficult, I should say, because in terms of the character development, which, spoiler alert, there's not a whole lot of character development in any of Bruce Lee's films. He's basically the same guy at the end of the movie that he was at the beginning. He just might have some more blood or scars on him, right? But he doesn't like... there's minor character development in Way of the Dragon where he decides to become more adaptable when he runs into adversity against Chuck. But that wasn't foreshadowed in the movie. It's not I think in the middle of Way of the Dragon, had he been like sitting at home watching a fight on TV and watching a boxer bouncing around, and then he's looking at that and kind of imitating it, then it would have been a slightly better payoff at the end when he's having a hard time with Chuck, and then he decides to imitate that boxer he saw on TV. Because then you're like, oh look, then the adaptation bit really pays off, right? But I think it was just kind of like, well, where did that come from? It wasn't set up, right? Yeah. And what is his character development in Big Boss? None. What's his character development in Fist of Fury? None. He kills everyone he wants to kill, and he says, F it. And even when you listen to Bruce's conversation with Dan Lee, he says, at the end of Fist of Fury, he's going to go out like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And they also basically run out and basically commit suicide at the end of that movie. Spoiler alert. I know it's from 1968 or whatever, right? And then, so you see that Bruce was kind of imitating Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. But there's no big character development.
Yeah.
Tang Long, what is his character development? He decides that he should use some flexible footwork when his regular kung fu doesn't work. That is the biggest character development for him in that film, all right? And finding out that the guy that he worked for, that uncle or whatever, was like a scumbag. But it didn't really change anything, right? He didn't need to kill Chuck. You know what I mean? Like, there's really no development arc there. All right, Lee wants revenge on the guy who he feels is responsible for his sister's death, and then he kills that guy, and that's not even in the final scene.
Yeah.
So it's kind of revenge, and then he gets his revenge. But it's not like at the end of the movie, after he killed both Han and Bob Wall O'Hara, where he like looks up and then like he hears his abbot and he goes like, you can get revenge, but it's not going to cure the demon in there. And then he kind of realizes like he still has it. Like he realizes that even after getting his revenge, he still doesn't have what he wants. No, he's fine. Thumbs up. The thumbs up is the final frame of Enter the Dragon, and then fade to the claw in focus, and then ding, and then the credits.
Yeah, Lalo Schifrin coming in hot.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, which is wild. By the way, I definitely told this on another podcast. I have a cousin who's like a baller and met Lalo Schifrin and was at Lalo Schifrin's home. And my cousin's a big Bruce Lee fan. And Lalo played on his piano.
Yes, you have said an
the
aside.
theme for Enter the Dragon. And I would be like,
so
oh
awesome.
my God.
So amazing.
Yes.
Oh my God.
God, I wish.
Yeah,
I wish I could tell that story. So no character development. So that's why when we do these hypotheticals against the different characters, we're really going on an extremely limited amount of information, because none of these films were their own franchises, where there were like trilogies where you get to see Chun Chun's character over 3 films and a little bit more about how he faces different situations. We're really going on very limited information, which is why if anyone gets upset about me thinking this character is better than that character, it's like, you calm down, buddy. So this is not to take away anyone's enjoyment of any of these films, right? So Lee in Enter the Dragon, I find highly adaptable and very smart and cunning. So he has that edge. He's just as good of a fighter, in my opinion, as the other guys. He's scrappy like Cheng Chao An, in that he could take all those slashes from Han's claw and continue going. The only way Han is any kind of threat to him is because of his hand. And he still overcomes that. He overcomes Han's best guy. He can fight multiple attackers. He's smart.
He has the adaptable moment when the abbot speaks to him, or like he hears the abbot's
Yes.
voice in the Hall of Mirrors
Right,
at the end.
right.
And then he goes around and smashes it.
Yes.
You know
He's
what I
just
mean?
an image in front of you or whatever. Which, by the way, that scene was not in the original version of Enter the Dragon. That was added later. And that whole scene where he's walking with the abbot and the abbot tells him, like, and then he's like asking him those questions. That was not in the original one, because they felt that slowed the pace of the film down. And which is why later when they added it in, they had to dub Bruce Lee's voice. That's not Bruce Lee actually doing his own voice.
I think it's John Little, right?
Yeah, I think so. And that's why it comes off a little weird, right? So anyway, I think Lee is looking like the strongest so far.
Okay, so we're doing one-on-one. The other thing about Lee is that, like, yeah, his skills are flawless. Your technique is flawless.
Yes.
Right?
Extraordinary.
Extraordinary, yeah,
Yes.
sorry. Thinking of a different film, but kind of close. That's not a Mandela effect. That was a mistake. But, like, his adaptability also came around with all the spy shit. You know what I mean? So it's like kind of like, when he grabs the snake and chucks it into the control room.
He can improvise.
He can improvise, right? But, you're not doing that in a fight.
Yeah, but sometimes you might need to improvise. And we've shown that on the fly, he can improvise.
Right.
And he can do it in a way, whereas, like, for example, Tang Long, he can improvise with, like, his footwork, and he realizes, some of those bad guys have guns, so he makes some darts in advance. But Lee kind of came up with that in the moment.
Yeah.
Which I think just makes him a tick sharper than, no one is going to accuse Tang Long of being a sharp guy, because he's like, when he sees the naked girl, and like he's very goofy, right? I think Lee edges him out a little bit because he's a little smarter, and he's just as scrappy.
Well, I kind of feel like if you're looking for any kind of character development that's just completely separate to all the films, the first 3 characters, everything's culminating into Lee at this point. It's like a best of everyone.
So yeah, I think that just puts Lee a slight notch above Tang Long. Plus, Tang Long did use a little bit of Wing Chun on Chuck Norris, packs out chain punches. but Lee used a little more Wing Chun on Bob Wall. So I don't really see Tang Long being that much more adaptable because Bruce's Shaolin character also had like some Wing Chun, had some Eskrima. So I think he's quite adaptable. All right. So now we come to Hai Tian from Game of Death. The character whom we know the least about because the only parts that were shot were the 3 fight scenes with Dan Inosanto, Jihan Jae, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. When they released the full footage, the full footage of what they have, which was put in the Warrior's Journey. So you got to see some of the in-between fight scenes. That James Tien was there. There was another actor there. And you see how Bruce kind of interacts with them. He also seems like that character is a little bit more of a man of the people. I believe in the original script or the treatment or whatever, he was supposed to be a retired martial arts champ.
Right.
So that would give me the impression he's also like someone who's kind of hip and up to date in that way, a little bit like Lee from Enter the Dragon, and that he knows what's up. He knows what the outside world is like. He's not a sequestered monk by any stretch of the imagination. But also in Chris's comment/question, he says the Jeet Kune Do concepts guys kind of rally for him, which is so funny because, you have these 2 camps in Jeet Kune Do, original Jeet Kune Do and Jeet Kune Do concept. So, of course, it makes sense that they would even have their favorite character that Bruce Lee played that also coincidentally falls in line with their dogmatic ideas about Jeet Kune Do or whatever, right? Which is funny. Until that question was, I never thought of it that way because I don't have any skin in the game about original Jeet Kune Do versus Jeet Kune Do concepts.
Yeah.
But it's funny to hear like, oh yeah, like the original JKD guys are like partial to Tang Long and Wei the Dragon because of the way he moves. But in Game of Death, he's almost institutionally adaptable, which is like the whole dogma of Jeet Kune Do.
Yeah.
He uses the flexible weapon, to defeat Dennis, the bamboo stick and the nunchucks. And then, he can defeat the Eskrima expert by kind of adapting to him. He can defeat the joint locking, grappling Jihan Jae. And then when faced with the most difficult challenge, the 7-foot plus tall style of the unknown Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, he figures out a way to adapt. He finds out that he, is sensitive to light and, brings a light in and then eventually actually defeats him with some kind of chokehold or neck crank, right? So that's like kind of maybe a way to support like the Jeet Kune Do concepts thing, which is so funny when you think of it. It's like, of course, but I mean, it's very easy to cherry pick some ideas and go, see, there. Yeah. He's totally championing our idea in this film or whatever, right? Even though not knowing the rest of the film, it's a little difficult to say.
I'm going to say something mildly sacrilegious here. Mm-hmm. I actually find Game of Death quite unwatchable, and it's the one Bruce Lee film that I have the least amount. Like I've watched it, and I just cannot remember. I remember the fights,
right?
But like I couldn't tell you anything about what it's about anymore. You know what I mean? Like I've tried. You know what I mean?
Well, the big problem is because he only shot those 3 fight scenes, mm-hmm. and at the time of his death, supposedly, he was in talks to finish that movie with George Lazenby. They were going to shoehorn George Lazenby into the script, which again, people are like, oh no, he totally had a script. At the time of his death, they were like, we have George Lazenby. How are we going to fit him into this movie? When you're having those kind of discussions, you don't have a solid script.
Yeah.
When you go, how can we shoehorn that guy who played James Bond once? Mm-hmm. I don't know. Maybe we'll make him his buddy or something. They were still working on that script. So they finished it anyway. I mean, this is preaching to the choir because I think everyone who's watching this knows that. Raymond Chow, very shrewd and cunning business guy, decided to finish Game of Death without Bruce Lee in the late 70s. And so what they did was they had those 3 fight scenes and decided to just make those fight scenes the finale, which they most likely would have been the finale anyway. And then you have to build a completely new story around something to get you to those final 3 fights. And so by using doubles, they had 3 or 4 people playing Bruce Lee in that movie. You had Kim Tai-chung, the Korean actor, doing most of the fight scenes. you had another actor who looked like Bruce Lee. Kim Tai-chung couldn't speak English. So for the close-up scenes, when English was required, they needed another actor who looked like Bruce Lee but could speak English for basically the close-up face shots. Then you had Yuen Biao doing all the acrobatic stuff, which is very painfully clear when you see the locker scene against Bob Wall, all the flips and everything. You literally can just see Yuen Biao's face doing it, and then it comes back to being Kim Tai-chung, right? And then the fourth person to play Bruce Lee in Game of Death is Bruce Lee himself via outtakes and different cuts from other movies where they would just splice in a scene from Way of the Dragon where he turns his head, and then the next scene it's Kim Tai-chung, and then the next scene it's Yuen Biao doing a flip. It's very schizophrenic. And the scene they came up with, oddly enough, is about the conspiracy behind the death of a famous movie star. So like Raymond was really milking this controversy, right? And a lot of people found it like a very disrespectful take. And, there's even more ridiculous stuff in there, like the actor is like looking at the mirror and they literally put a cardboard cutout of Bruce's face on the mirror. And then you have Kim Tai-chung behind it and you can see the neck kind of like moving underneath it because obviously the face is pasted to the mirror. So it's understandable if you only saw it once or twice way back in the day why it's unforgettable because the story is ridiculous. Although it has a great score by John Barry. It's amazing. When you see the opening sequence, it's like a Bond film. It's really, really well done, dun, with the horns and everything. Music is really good. Movie was a total turkey. But the people lined up to see it because they knew the final 10 minutes or 15 minutes, they were going to see this footage of Bruce Lee that never came out. So that was the thing, and that's why it's all the way at the end. It's the big carrot dangling, right?
Yeah.
But the story that they used to finish Game of Death in the late 70s was not the original idea Bruce Lee had, which was something to the tune of he was like a former martial arts champion and his sister got kidnapped and she's in Korea at some temple and held hostage and he basically has to go and rescue her. Something to that effect, all right? And who knows if that would actually have been the final story had Bruce Lee completed it. Obviously, the fight scenes are an ode to his Jeet Kune Do philosophy. The yellow tracksuit represents aliveness and adaptation and everything like that. So we only know about his ability to adapt in there. We don't really know much about him. But he is supposedly a martial arts champion, so he does have a really good pedigree, but so do pretty much all of his other characters. And he's also, institutionally adaptable. So I think the first two guys, I think Chun and Cheng Chao An would be defeated by the other three because they have certain character kinks that I think would work against them. And I think the other guys are either adaptable in the case of Tang Long, cunning in the case of Lee, and super adaptable in the case of Hai Tian. So I think they would blow the first two out of the water. All right? So I think it's now really between the last three. And it also makes sense. His characters got more robust as his movies went along. So it makes sense that, if you're following my train of thought, that it would be the more final ones because he's kind of getting better at these characters as it goes along, right? So, if we put the three of them, all right, so we match, okay? So we take Tang Long, and he has to have a match with Lee and a match with Hai Tian. I think Lee might be able to pull it through against Tang Long, and I think so would Hai Tian.
Yeah, Tang Long's he's looking like the weakest out of the three,
out of the three, but he's still a very strong character. But we're talking about the weakest out of three relatively strong ones, right? Yeah. But I think Lee and Hai Tian would be able to defeat Tang Long. All right? Would you agree with that?
Unfortunately,
by the way, feel free to disagree with me.
I know.
It doesn't bother me at all.
No, you see, the thing about it is, it's just like I'm like thinking about it, right? I mean, look.
By the way, someone outside disagrees.
Sorry.
Yes.
Haters.
Gotta love New York.
Haters gonna hate, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of like, the thing is, if you just end up with the three, I kind of still feel like you should have Chen Zhen in there, only because he's massively skillful.
He is.
Right? So, like, and on his day, would he be able to kind of take out one of them?
Yeah, but yeah, maybe. I mean, I think it's also a toss-up. The other thing is, like, in the real world, when you have highly skilled people fighting each other, assuming that, let's say, similar weight class, similar skill, similar experience, you have many fights where it's like, you know, if they fought 10 times, it would be 50-50 or 70-30. Like, it's not like if you put them 10 out of 10 times, this guy would win every single time, right?
Yeah.
Especially if they keep fighting each other, they start to figure each other out a little bit. I get it, but for example, Chun Chun's very emotional, and he can get a little bit like this. And Lee, in Enter the Dragon, when he fights Bob Wall, he kind of trounces Bob Wall, and Bob Wall gets emotional and then breaks the bottle and comes at him in rage, and Bruce is able to handle him like no one's business.
Yeah.
So we've seen Lee deal with a rage monster in the form of O'Hara's character.
Yeah.
And then straight up kill him. Mm-hmm. So I think Lee would be fine with kind of a raging Chun Chun.
Yeah, okay. So I think the way I see it as is right now, right, is that it's probably like the populist idea, but I think when all's said and done, I think Lee shades it all the way to the top. Because I think if he fought Hai Tien, let's argue that Hai Tien is an ex-martial arts champion, is maybe his technique is better.
Right.
I think Lee has the more adaptability and the cunning with that spy shit.
Yeah, exactly. Like, that's the thing. Like,
he'll fight dirty a little bit.
Yes, Chris seems to dismiss Lee a little bit because he only knows Shaolin Kung Fu. But if you're looking at the film, he's proven himself immensely adaptable, not just in fighting, but in a wide range of situations, right? So you really know this guy's like a little bit of a Bond type, and it's hard to bet against Bond.
Yeah.
You know? And also, it goes without saying that Enter the Dragon is a huge Dr. No ripoff anyway. Yes. It's kind of a ripoff of a Bond movie anyway, right?
Absolutely, 100%.
So there is that. But there is a kind of a scrappiness. Hai Tien has, in my opinion, some of the best characteristics of the other guys without some of their faults. So, for example, he's scrappy in that, like, you know, he can get whacked with a nunchuck and, like, just kind of, you know, lick his blood and kind of go, okay, fine. So he's got a little bit of that scrappiness of, like, Cheng Chao An, but seemingly without the whoring and drinking. But we don't know because we've not seen the rest of the movie, right? He has, like, the weapons ability and the wide range of skills of Chun Chun, but he's not a rage monster. He has the footwork and movement of Tang Long, and he's very adept at adaptation, maybe better than Tang Long. So it really, I think, comes to Hai Tien and Lee. And I think I think you're right. There's that James Bond factor of Lee, where he's just the sharpest of the bunch, the most adaptable in a wide range of situations. Like, I can imagine if Lee were losing the fight to Hai Tien, he would, like, you know, spot something out of the corner of his eye and, like, you know, throw something to, like, a lamp would, like, land on Hai Tien's head and, like, shock him, and then he would give him a sidekick. Like, I feel he would improv something to win, even if it meant being a little dirty, despite the fact that he's a Shaolin monk or whatever, right? I mean, Shaolin monks shouldn't kill, yet, you know, he basically kicked Han into a spear. And, so I think Lee wins.
I think so too.
Yeah.
I really do. You know, it's funny because the thing is, many years ago, I read the Bourne trilogy, which is, for anyone who knows, is actually radically different to the way the films portrayed him. Like, it starts off in the first film as kind of like the Bourne identity, and then they change the story and the, you know.
And in the books, isn't it Ben Affleck instead of what's his face?
Yes, exactly.
All right, good. That makes it so much better.
Yes, absolutely.
But they say in the book, like, Jason Bourne looks like Ben Affleck. They make a point of that.
Yes, absolutely. 100%
Yeah,
before Ben Affleck was probably even born. But yeah, absolutely right. But there's this one chapter in the Bourne Ultimatum, which is the second book, I think, or is it the Bourne Supremacy? Either way, second book, Bourne's had to be brought out of retirement because, like, his wife has been kidnapped, but it's like by the side that want him to fight this fake Jason Bourne that's going around using his name and everything. And he has to take on this random Chinese guy in Hong Kong, right? And he's like an older guy, like he's an older guy, right? And he has this fight with this younger Chinese like kung fu master spy guy, and at the end of it, they kind of like, he beats him, and at the end of it, the guy's like, "You're amazing, like, you know, I thank you, you beat me in that." And he said, "The only reason I beat you is because I know more dirty tricks. You are a better fighter than me.
Right.
Your skill is better, and if
Yes.
we had this in a fair fight, you
Yes.
would beat me."
Right.
And
right.
that's the kind of vibe that I get from the idea of Hai Tien versus like Lee, is that like Hai Tien might be actually better, more skillful.
Right.
But Lee will.
Yeah,
he just has that edge
Yeah.
to fight dirty a little bit. You know
he's
what I
got
mean?
that edge. Anyone who could pull off that brown suit, you
Oh,
know, that
oh my
guy's
God,
slick,
yes,
man, right?
absolutely.
Yeah. So I would think, if you put them all together, I think Lee wins hands down.
Yes.
All right. So if we were to rank them, then I think it would go as the strongest fighter would be Lee, then Hai Tien, then Tang Long, then Chan Chun, and then Cheng Chao An. So actually, in almost reverse or order of the films, right? Although obviously, Game of Death those scenes were shot before Enter the Dragon, but that movie came out later. But you could say the order they were filmed in reverse is the strongest. So you know, there's something can be said that he was kind of like improving these characters as they went on. So I think Lee is the undisputed champion now. Having said that, obviously, I think Lee would survive all of the situations that any of the characters were put in the other film. So if you took Lee and put him into Game of Death, I think he would still come out on top. If you took Lee and put him into Tang Long's character, I think he would definitely win against Chuck Norris. So I think that goes without saying, but I thought maybe for the final bit of our discussion here, before we sign off today, is to think, how would the various characters, I should say, fare in the main fight scenes of the other movies? So if you're not local to NYC, one of the easiest ways for you to improve your Wing Chun training is to train online with me. Online private training is tailored toward the individual and geared towards serious practitioners who want to improve their skills or knowledge base. I offer 2 private lesson subscriptions, twice a month and 4 times a month. Kung Fu Genius listeners use the code KFG Online to get 1 online consultation lesson free with the purchase of any subscription. That code and the links are in the description below. Online private training is a convenient way for you to ask any of the questions you've had about application, form, theory, or even how to teach. Bring a partner to train with you online at absolutely no extra cost. I'll show you how to train with your partner online. Again, use the code KFG Online to get a free consultation lesson with the purchase of any online subscription. Links are in the description below, and I'll see you online. Okay, so let's just do the lightning round. We have Cheng Chao An from Big Boss. Okay.
Yep.
I picked 2 fight scenes from all of the films, okay? So obviously we'll leave Cheng Chao An out of the Big Boss fight scenes because he's from the Big Boss. But for the Big Boss, I have the big fight outside where he kicks like the dude through the wall. Because there's some other fight scenes, but I just picked 2.
Yep.
And then the final fight scene with the Big Boss himself. In Fists of Fury, I picked the first big fight in the Japanese school where he's got to take all those guys on, and then the final fight with the Japanese villain. So I pulled out the Bob Baker one and a few of the other ones. Tang Long, the Way the Dragon, I picked the pre-Coliseum fight. Because, he's got all the fights in the alleyways with the other guys, but I think like he's got that pre-fight where he fights like Wong In-sik and Bob Wall, and they're all kind of fighting outside. Because there he has like 2 formidable opponents, and then the final fight with Chuck.
Yep.
And then in Enter the Dragon, I picked the Bob Wall fight, and then the final with Han. And then for Game of Death, I picked Dan and Kareem because I think they're the strongest of all that. And I think even Jihan Jae, whom I've met, would also agree that he was the weakest of all of them. When I met him, he also told me it was very sweet. I was like, "What was it like filming those fight scenes with Bruce Lee?" And he said it was very difficult. He said Bruce didn't lose his patience with me, but I kept messing up. And he goes, I had a very hard time keeping up with him because he was just so good. And you can kind of see it, like, but he was there because he represented a specific kind of grappling Korean style.
Yeah.
But you can tell he's very rigid compared to the other guys. And that rigidity, Jihan Jae kind of almost admitted, like, that was him just not being able to keep up with Bruce, right? So having said that, All right, now here's the lightning round for the final bit. Cheng Chao An, big boss character, okay? How would he do fighting all of the Japanese guys who all play by Chinese actors in that fight scene in Fists of Fury? What do you think? Win or lose, would he come out on top?
He'd lose.
He'd lose?
Yeah, he's not skillful enough.
To beat all those guys?
Yeah,
Plus they had weapons.
Yeah, like he'd go in and he'd probably take down a couple and then they would just pummel him.
Because he does have multiple attacker skills in Big Boss.
Yeah.
But those guys are not like all trained karatekas or aikidoists or judoists.
They're all chumps.
Yeah.
You know, really, compared to like going into like Jingwu, like they're just like kind of, he's going in and he's just wrecking.
Right.
But like he doesn't have the temperament or the skill to be able to take those people on.
So let's just do that fight scene and let's do all the characters in that fight scene and then go to the next one.
Okay, cool.
I think that's easier.
Yep.
It allows us to stay more topical. Okay, so obviously we're not going to say Chen Chun. Chen Chun is in that movie and he's successful. Tang Long, would Tang Long be able to beat up all those karate guys? Because he did some kind of multiple attacker-ish, but it's just like kind of a couple of those like thuggy dudes, but he's not really fighting them all at the same time.
They're kind of chumpy, but
Tang Long is very good one-on-one.
Yeah, he's great one-on-one. I think that he would fare way better, but I think it's a 50-50 that he'd actually make it all the way through.
Right.
Because he's much better one-on-one.
Yeah, so I think the only reason there's a question mark is because we don't really, unlike Cheng Chao An, who does like do all the kicks to all the Thai guys, and then there's like, he has those cred. We didn't really see Tang Long in like a huge melee. No. So I would put a question mark whether he would survive that fight.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what about Lee from Enter the Dragon? I think yes.
Absolutely. 100%.
Yes, I think he would beat all those guys handily. And what about Hai Tian?
He would not handle them quite as well as Lee, but he would handle them.
I think he would too. He's got the weapons chops, the adaptability. But again, from Game of Death, we didn't see him against multiple attackers.
Exactly.
He did beat Kareem Abdul-Jabbar though, so I think that gives him a. So I would say like, unlike Tang Long was very good one-on-one, I think Hai Tian has a slightly better chance in that scene. Okay.
Yeah.
So now let's go to the final fight scene against the Japanese villain who also wields a katana, which adds an added element of difficulty, all right?
Yep.
Cheng Chao An from Big Boss.
Oh, he's chopped it off.
He would get his head chopped off, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Especially because there were some boobs there in that film. Maybe the Japanese guy would just need to bring that geisha in real quick, and then Cheng Chao An is like, and then off with the head.
Imagine if he was the one in the scene where it's like he recognized the Japanese guy by the nipple.
No, that was his Hirameki, bro. I've already discussed that. So, yeah, but if you watch the English version and he looks in, he sees the cook's nipples and he goes, "So you're Japanese, right?" But it's because he was wearing that Hirameki, not because of his nipples. Bruce is not. Cheng Chen is not some expert in nippleology, right? So I think Cheng Chao An would not beat that guy. Obviously, Cheng Chen beats him. What about Tang Long?
Ooh, see...
Because we haven't seen Tang Long against like a sword.
Yeah, we haven't seen him actually fight against any real weapons. He's fought with weapons.
Yes, and he's stopped dudes from using weapons on him. But his craftiness against a katana, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. And are we taking into account that he's already had a ton of fights? Like
no. I think we're
in.
Putting them in
Fresh.
To be fair, in their freshest versions.
Okay. Ooh, that's a tough one.
That is a tough one.
It's a really tough one.
Part of me says yes, he's good, he's adaptable, he's smart, but he's untested, at least in Way of the Dragon, against a katana.
I think honestly, it could go either way, and I think Katana Guy shades it just by virtue of the fact that he has a big freaking sword. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yes. Although if you gave Bruce the nunchucks, which Chen Chun has in that fight scene, he might be able to do it, but I don't know if he's actually trained it. So I would say question mark on Tang Long beating the final villain.
Yeah.
Lee. Yes. Lee would figure out something, right? Mm-hmm. I think so.
Yeah.
Although I think he would probably struggle a little bit, but if he had nunchucks, definitely.
Yeah.
Also, any other type of weapon, because that Lee from Enter the Dragon has proven he can fight with a bunch of different weapons. Mm-hmm. Hai Tian.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Right? Again, he will... I think I'm just kind of... It's all speculation. I feel that Hai Tian is probably... I think the fact that he's like an ex-martial arts champion...
Yes.
That he's sort of kind of bound by a certain way of fighting, which is why he would lose against Lee. You know what I mean?
but Game of Death, he's all about like, he even says like, oh, this bamboo represents adaptability. Like he's institutionally like Bruce was really starting to really try to write in Jeet Kune Do philosophy into his scripts, and when you see the uncut stuff, he goes off explaining for a little. There's like a lot of what do you call it when exposition?
Yeah,
where he's like explaining, and it's like a little. I don't know, long-winded in my
Yeah,
opinion.
I don't mean it in terms of skill. I mean it in terms of like kind of if we're looking at, as we've looked at each person's personality
Right.
and their kind of background, if
Yes.
there is any.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
As much as we can deduce
as much as
from
we
this
can,
film.
right? Lee is a super spy, Shaolin monk, and Hai Tian is an ex-martial arts world champion.
Right.
It's probably used to working within the rules of being in a martial artist, I think. You know what I mean? I mean, like I
Although
said,
he'll neck crank a dude.
I mean, I'm sure
He'll
have
choke
to.
a dude with chucks. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I think he would do okay. I think it's because we've already determined that Lee and Hai Tian are the strongest.
Yeah.
I think it's always going to be, they're probably able to handle it, but there's always some specific question marks. Okay,
Yeah.
so let's go to, wait a minute. Did we
We haven't done Way of the Dragon. That's where we're next.
but did we do both?
Did both fights.
We did Big Boss, right?
Yeah.
Did we do both fights on Big Boss?
No, we haven't got to the. Oh yeah, we did both fights on. Oh no, we haven't. Didn't do both fights on Big Boss.
No,
I
right.
think
Because we started with Cheng Chao An. That's why we
Yes.
avoided. All right, so now let's go do the big boss fights.
Okay.
So we have the big fight outside versus all the thugs and the son of the big boss. All right. And then we also have the final fight.
Yeah.
So obviously Cheng Chao An gets a pass because he wins those fights. Chun fighting those guys, I think
Easy.
definitely.
Easy.
Tang Long, I think.
Yep.
I think he'd beat those guys, even though it's a bit of a question mark in terms of his multiple attacker prowess, but I think he would do okay. Lee, for sure.
Yep.
Hai Tian, I also think so, even though we don't know about his multiple attacker prowess.
Yes, it's the thing.
He might be really adaptable against one dude, even a
Yeah.
very difficult dude, but can he handle all those guys?
Yeah, that one remains a question mark for me.
Oh, okay. Final fight in Big Boss, the old man. I think all of the characters would beat the shit out of that old man.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And I think all of them would do it better than Cheng Chao An did it.
yes, absolutely.
Okay, so
100%.
that goes without saying. All right, so then we did the Fist of Fury fights.
Yeah.
We did the Big Boss fights. So now let's go to the Way of the Dragon fights. So we have the pre-Coliseum. So really when Bruce fights the Korean guy, Wong In-sik, who's supposed to be a
Yeah.
Japanese guy, and then fights Bob Wall. All right,
Yeah.
so we got kind of two fights in the one fight.
Yeah.
Okay, Cheng Chao An, how would he do against those guys?
Bob Wall's winning that one.
I think Bob Wall, I think he could beat Wang In-sik. I think maybe Bob Wall would give him some trouble. Okay, Chun. All right.
Well, I always like to see Bob Wall get beaten.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Bob
I think-
Wall deserves to get beaten
Yeah, I
for the
think-
number of times he sold his suit from Enter the Dragon.
Yeah, I think Cheng Chang could take that one.
I think so too. I think
Yeah.
Chun can beat both of those guys quite handily. Tang Long obviously gets a pass because it's his movie.
100%.
Lee has beaten a better version of Bob Wall in Enter the Dragon.
Yes, absolutely. Way
And
better
I don't
version.
think he'd have any problem with Wang In-sik.
Yep.
Hai Tian.
Yeah, two people. He's got that.
Yeah, I think
that
I think Hai
he's got
Tian
that.
is. Plus, also that fight scene, it's kind of individual.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Hai Tian, no problem. Okay, so now let's go to the final fight scene of Way of the
Yeah.
Dragon. Okay, fighting Chuck Norris. All right, Cheng Chao An,
Dead.
dead, right?
Yeah.
Chun.
Ooh, that's a tough
Because
one.
Chun does beat Bob Baker, who's kind of a similar tough man karate guy.
Yep.
I think Chun win. I think Chun can beat. I think Chun can beat Colt, the Chuck Norris's character. in Way of the
Yeah, I think he can beat him, but does he though? Because I think that Chuck's character is quite measured.
Yes,
I mean,
and
really,
he has got a lot of body hair.
Yeah, he's got a lot of body hair.
Right.
Right. I think if I actually think that Chuck might beat him.
Okay, I think it's a toss-up.
Yeah.
I think it's a close one. Could go either way. Maybe if they fought 10 times, 50-50.
Yeah,
maybe,
absolutely.
Right? Okay, now what about Lee fighting Colt? Yeah, come on.
Please.
Out of here.
Yeah.
Out of here like Vladimir. Hai Tian?
Oh, 100%.
No problem.
Boom,
No
done.
problem. He beat Kareem. It's difficult.
Yeah.
He's going to lose against Chuck.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we go to Tang Long. All right, and the big boss. Oh no, wait. Sorry, we go to the Enter the Dragon
We're
fights.
at Enter the Dragon.
So I picked two. the Bob Wall fight, and then the final versus Han. So let's go to the Bob Wall fight.
Now we're talking about the Bob Wall fight that Lee wins.
Yeah, in the tournament. In the tournament, right?
Okay.
Where he starts off
Yeah.
in the kind of fake Wing Chun setup, right? Yeah, exactly. Right. Man, if I could only just give O'Hara's character 5 minutes of instruction, I would show him how to beat all those combos. Okay, so Cheng Chao An, would he beat O'Hara?
Again, Bob Wall gets to beat someone again.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, Chen Zhen.
It would be a longer fight, but I think Chen Zhen could beat him.
I think so too. Tang Long.
Also a longer fight. Actually, probably a longer fight than Chen Zhen for the simple reason that Tang Long is a little more kind of measured.
Yes.
Right.
Although I feel that O'Hara is very similar to Colt in terms of power.
Right.
And
that
he
would
beat,
make sense.
it, maybe not in terms of the actual style, but they're both like the powerful, big Western karate guy. I think Tang Long gets it done.
Yeah.
Obviously, Lee gets a pass because he wins in that movie anyway. And then Hai Tian.
I think Hai Tian does it in a far more stylish way.
Yes. Instead of, for example, maybe giving him the Paxao stuff, he just straight up head kicks him from there or whatever with those yellow Asics.
Absolutely. It lasts a couple more minutes, but it's way
A little more
stylish.
spectacular. A little more spectacular. Okay, great. All right, so now the Han fight. Okay, Cheng Chao An. Dead. Okay. All right.
Man, I don't even think he made it to that fight.
I don't even made it to that fight. Okay. Chen Zhen versus Han.
Dead.
Yeah, it could be a little tough, right? It could be a little tough.
I think
his emotional,
yeah.
Because if you remember when Han is slashing up Lee, he's like looking at him and smiling, and he always has a smile on his face. And I think that would trigger an emotional response from Chen Zhen.
Yep.
And I think that's exactly what Han would use to slash a shit out of him.
Absolutely, 100%.
Okay, Tang Long versus Han.
Now that's a tough one, but I actually think Tang Long's going to lose. I think Han is actually a better fighter.
Okay. All right. At least he can slash him up. And all right. Okay.
Yeah.
I think Tang Long maybe pulls it through. But again, difficult because we don't have enough background to really know how these guys work in these situations. Mm-hmm. Tang Long is the only character who well, maybe with the exception of Jen, who really doesn't get slashed, or like cut or anything like that, right?
You also don't know anything about his martial arts background.
Yeah, he's
Like,
just
he
kind
just
of
comes there
generic
and
kung fu,
he's
right?
turned
yes.
up and he's badass.
Yeah.
You know what
Dragon
I mean?
whips his tail.
Yeah.
Mang Long Bai Bei. All right, so then Hai Tian versus Han.
Oh yeah. That one's a little longer because Hai Tian doesn't
Maybe he's
have,
playing with him a little bit more.
He doesn't have the same emotional kind of like motivation that
Yes,
Lee has.
right,
So it's going to be
right.
like, the fuck are you like fighting me for? Like, and it's to the death.
Right.
Then he'll come through.
Okay, now we come to the two fights in Game of Death, the Dan Inosanto fight and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. So versus Dan Inosanto, the Filipino Eskrima master. And I know he has a name in the movie, but I don't remember what it is. Okay, Cheng Chao An? Dead. Chen Zhen?
Dead.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it would be a little longer, but I think Dan Inosanto is going to take him.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tang Long. I think that would actually be a really good fight. I think it'd be a very entertaining fight.
I think it would be a great fight. I think if he could get his hand on some nunchucks.
Yes. He can use nunchucks. We've seen that. He can use double nunchucks too.
Yeah.
We don't know about his ability to use a single stick or whatever, but he does use the pole. I think Tang Long, maybe it's one of those if they fought 10 times, 50-50, 70-30, but I don't think one would, I think it's very close.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and now Lee versus Dan Inosanto. Dead. All right. You mean Lee or Dan?
Dan,
yes. Okay. And then, so Hai Tian gets a pass because it's his movie. Okay, so now the final fight. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, The Style of the Unknown. Mm-hmm. Okay. Cheng Chao An?
So all Kareem Abdul-Jabbar does is he sticks his hand out like that, like the little rascals.
Yes.
And just does that for like, I don't know, a minute before he just... like
pretty much, right?
Done.
Okay, Cheng Chao An dead.
Cheng Chao An dead. Chen Zhen. Oh, he'll get a few licks in.
Yes.
But
I think eventually
he's not going to be able to get past those limbs.
Right.
He probably doesn't even know what basketball is. Who's this guy?
Yeah, exactly,
Who
right?
knows?
Tang Long versus Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Ooh. You see, I think Oh,
I don't know. I think it's a 50-50 toss-up. I don't know.
It is a 50-50, but
It's
you know
difficult,
what?
but I think Kareem edges him out a little bit.
Yeah?
Because I just think the size difference. I think Tang Lung's character, having learned Kung Fu in China, has never faced anyone like him. Whereas Hai Tian, being someone who's been in competition, has faced lots of different types of people.
Yeah.
Which is why it's easier for him to be adaptable. I think Tang Lung doesn't have the experience of dealing with someone like this, given what most likely was his martial arts background, having learned in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
In the new territories in the 70s.
Yeah.
So I think maybe no. Okay, Lee versus Kareem.
It'll take him a little longer, but he'll do it. He'll make it happen.
Yeah, I think it's his hardest fight out of everyone, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think he does pull it together, and obviously High 10. So there you go.
Wow.
There's our fighters ranked. I don't know what the official ranking then would be, all right? But that was a lot of fun, and that was a really great question. Thanks a lot to Chris Bach for giving us that. I thought that was absolutely awesome. And, well, hey, that's all I got to say about that. Okay, everyone. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of The Kung Fu Genius. As always, don't forget to subscribe to The Kung Fu Genius. Hit that bell for notifications. And if you have any questions for me to answer on a future episode, or if you have suggestions about a themed topic like the one we did today, go ahead and put those in the comments below. And also let me know if you disagreed with me, agreed with me, or you think I'm full of crap, or you think he's full of crap. And that's all I got to say about that. And I'll see you guys next time.
Word is I'm a kung fu genius. Technique speaks for me, not lineage. Forget Jet Li, cause I'm the one. Many call me seafood, but to you I'm Seagung. And I produce masters. You surpassed us. Your kung fu stiffer than corpse and caskets. City Wing Chun is the house I built. Violate the gate and your blood gets spilt. Alex Richter, always the victor.
All right, peeps, on today's episode of The Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be answering, that's not what we did.